The Glatherian Empire stretched across dozens of planets, each one glittering with towers, flying ships, and vast gardens that seemed to touch the stars. It was a kingdom of intelligence, power, and tradition. At its heart stood the royal palace, a massive structure of crystal and metal, shining under the light of 3 suns. It was here, in a throne room that seemed to stretch forever, that the king of the Glatherians, Lord Kelvern, ruled with wisdom and an iron will. Kelvern had ruled the empire for over 3 decades, guiding his people through wars, alliances, and discoveries. He was tall and imposing, with deep purple skin and eyes that glowed faintly with intelligence. His voice carried weight across the marble floors, and when he spoke, all who listened fell silent. Around him sat his council elders, generals, and advisors, but today, the throne room was filled with a different audience. His daughters, the Glatherian princesses, were unlike anything the human worlds had ever imagined. They were tall, graceful, with eyes that shifted colors in the sunlight and hair that shimmered like liquid silver. Each had trained for years in diplomacy, combat, and science. They were strong, proud, and independent. Today, however, they were not here as warriors or diplomats. They were here as daughters, summoned by their father for a command that would change their lives forever. Kelvorn's voice echoed across the throne room. "My daughters, the time has come for a new era in our empire. A human has arrived at our world's an ambassador from your planet, the first of his kind to step into Glatheria. He is not a warrior, but he carries with him the spirit of his people, resourceful, brave, and cunning. I have decided that he will become the husband of my daughters." A heavy silence filled the room. The princesses exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and disbelief. Marriage to a human. The idea seemed absurd to some, dangerous to others. Glatherians were taught to value strength, intelligence, and centuries of tradition. Humans were fragile, unpredictable, and untested in the ways of their galaxy. Yet the king's command was clear, and Kelvorn's eyes burned with unwavering resolve. "Father," began Princess Lysera, the eldest, "we honor your judgment. But marriage to a human? Surely there are others more suitable for the bonds of our empire." Kelvorn's gaze hardened. "Lysera, I am aware of the risks. But this human is exceptional. He has solved problems that even my council could not, and he carries the ingenuity of an entire species. This union is not for pleasure, nor is it a whim. It is for the strength of Glatheria, and for the unity of our worlds." Princess Mirth, the second eldest, stepped forward, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "And if some of us cannot follow this decree, must we choose duty over our own judgment?" Kelvorn's face remained calm, but the air itself seemed to tense. "You are princesses of the Glatherian Empire. You have been raised to think, to act, to lead. But you have also been raised to obey the crown. This is not a request. It is an order." Whispers passed through the room. Some princesses bowed their heads, accepting the decree. Others clenched their fists, already plotting how they might resist without dishonoring their father outright. The tension was thick, like the storm clouds that sometimes darken the palace gardens. That evening, the princesses retired to their chambers. Some were quiet, lost in thought, imagining what life with a human might be like. Others spoke in hushed tones, their conversations filled with doubt and curiosity. Princess Solara, the youngest, paced her room. She had always been curious about humans ever since her father had allowed her to study their history and culture. She had read tales of human courage, ingenuity, and determination. And yet, she was a Glatherian princess. To marry a human was unthinkable. What does father see in him? She whispered to herself. A species so fragile, how can he think this will strengthen us? But even as she questioned, a small spark of excitement flickered in her chest. Humans were unpredictable. They were clever. Perhaps there was more to them than the story suggested. Meanwhile, Kelvorn was in his private study overlooking the city. He had watched humans from afar, studied their ways, and even communicated with their leaders. He respected their courage, admired their ability to adapt, and knew that their resourcefulness could benefit the Glatherian Empire. Yet he also knew this would test his daughters not just as princesses, but as individuals capable of choice, loyalty, and courage. The next morning, the human ambassador arrived at the palace. His ship was unlike any Glatherian vessel, rough, angular, and practical. The princesses watched from a distance as he stepped out, his posture confident yet respectful. He wore simple clothing, nothing like the intricate ceremonial garments of the Glatherians. But there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. Kelvern introduced the human formally. "This is Ambassador Jaren of Earth. He comes with goodwill and intelligence. He has already proven his worth in negotiation and in diplomacy. You will spend time with him, learn from him, and understand his ways. He is now part of our world." Jaren bowed respectfully to the king and then to the princesses. "I am honored to be here," he said, his voice steady. "I have studied your culture and your history. I hope to learn from all of you and to share what I can." Some princesses nodded politely. Others could not hide their skepticism. Lysera crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. "You may have intelligence, human," she said coldly, "but do you understand what it means to live in Glatheria? To command respect? To survive our ways?" Jaren smiled slightly. "I don't know yet, but I intend to try." Over the following days, the human learned the customs of the palace. He studied the Glatherian language, trained in etiquette, and observed the princesses in their daily routines. To some, he seemed clumsy, unsure, even fragile. To others, his curiosity and bravery were admirable. He asked questions that challenged tradition. Sometimes his answers surprised even the king's council. Princess Mirth began to notice something unusual. While the human struggled with some customs, he excelled at solving problems quickly and creatively. In a garden where the irrigation system had broken, he analyzed the pipes, suggested a solution, and restored water flow within Arzafit that had stumped the royal engineers for days. Even Solara, who had doubted him most, found herself intrigued. He was not just clever, he was kind, humble, and determined. She caught him studying the stars one night and quietly asking questions about the constellations. "They are very different from your world," she said softly. "Yet you try to understand them." Jaren looked up and smiled. "I like to understand things, I think. Understanding is the first step to respect." The days turned into weeks. The human continued to navigate Pallas's life with unexpected skill. Some princesses, still loyal to their father's command, began to see potential in the alliance. Others quietly resisted, unsure if they could ever marry someone so different. In the throne room, Kelvern watched carefully. He had expected some resistance, but the human's actions were exceeding his expectations. He allowed the princesses to interact freely, observing their reactions. Some were growing fond of Jaren, others wary. All were being tested not by war or politics, but by human ingenuity and courage. Late one evening, a secret meeting took place in the palace gardens. Princess Lysera, Princess Mirth, and two others met in the shadows, away from their father's eyes. "We cannot simply obey blindly," Lysera whispered. "If we are forced into this, it will change everything about us. Our people, our traditions, everything. Yet he is different. There is something in him that makes me wonder. Perhaps he is not as weak as we thought." Solara remained quiet, her thoughts a whirlwind. She wanted to see the humans succeed, but she also feared the consequences of defying their father. The night air was thick with tension. The princesses had a choice: obedience or defiance. Their hearts and minds wrestled with duty, curiosity, and courage. The human, oblivious to their secret plans, continued to navigate their world, unknowingly testing their loyalty, challenging their assumptions, and inspiring both admiration and rebellion. Kelvern, observing from afar, knew the storm had only just begun. This was more than a test of a human, it was a test of his daughters, and the outcome would shape the future of the Glatherian Empire forever. The sun rose over the crystal towers of the Glatherian Palace, scattering light across the endless gardens and floating walkways. Inside, the princesses awoke with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The human ambassador Jaren had been in the palace for weeks, yet each day brought new surprises. He adapted quickly to their customs, asked unexpected questions, sometimes solved problems with ideas no Glatherian had considered. Some of the princesses admired him. Others bristled, determined to resist their father's command. Princess Lysera, eldest of the sisters, was the first to stir. She looked out over the palace gardens, her mind racing. "Father believes in him," she murmured to herself. "But can I? Can we trust a human to become part of our family?" Her doubts were shared by Mirth, who had spent hours observing Jaren as he navigated the complex palace life. He was not perfect, he sometimes misunderstood their language or misjudged their etiquette, but there was something in his mind. A spark of creativity, courage, and determination that reminded her of the stories of Glatherian heroes. That morning, the human was assigned to assist in the palace archives, a vast hall of shimmering data crystals. The archives contained centuries of knowledge, from diplomatic treaties to engineering schematics. Jaren was to help organize records for a meeting between Glatherian council members and a delegation from a distant star system. "Follow me," said Archivist Vorlon, a tall Glatherian with eyes like polished amethyst. "These crystals hold everything we have ever recorded. Be careful. One mistake could erase centuries of knowledge." Jaren nodded, his hand steady. "I understand. Let's begin." The princesses observed from a balcony above. Solara's curiosity was piqued as she watched him. Unlike the other Glatherians, who often treated the archives with cold precision, Jaren asked questions, tested ideas, and proposed methods to organize the data more efficiently. Even the archivist raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "This human may be more capable than I first imagined," Vorlon admitted quietly. "He sees connections we miss." Solara smiled softly. "Perhaps he is not as fragile as we believed." Not all the princesses were so easily impressed. Lysera remained skeptical. She had grown up in a world of order and tradition. Human, no matter how clever, was still unpredictable. She could not help but wonder, what if his ingenuity brought disaster instead of progress? Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Princess Mirth met with the youngest princesses to discuss their options. "We cannot simply obey without thought," she whispered. "Father's command is clear, but must it define us? Must it force us into something we do not choose?" The youngest princesses nodded, fear and determination mixed in their eyes. They'd always admired Jaren's courage and calm intelligence, but loyalty to their father was ingrained in them. The question remained, could they balance duty with their own hearts? As the day progressed, the palace was alive with whispers and small acts of rebellion. Princesses exchanged secret glances, shared coded messages, and planned discreet ways to challenge the king's command without openly defying him. Even simple gestures, like avoiding the human during meals or questioning the purpose of his tasks, were considered acts of subtle resistance. Jaren, unaware of the tension surrounding him, continued to adapt. He spent hours learning Glatherian etiquette, discussing politics with council members, and even observing the princesses in private moments, learning about their personalities and dreams. His openness and respect won the admiration of some princesses and the quiet suspicion of others. One evening, while the suns dipped below the horizon, Solara approached Jaren in the palace gardens. "You ask many questions," she said gently, "and observe everything." "Why?" Jaren looked at her eyes, thoughtful. "Because understanding comes before trust," he replied. "I cannot respect or help someone I do not understand, and if I am to live here, I want to learn everything I can." Solara was silent. For a moment, watching the way his eyes reflected the fading sunlight. "You are brave," she whispered, "and not what I expected." Jaren smiled faintly. "I have learned that bravery comes in many forms. Not all of it is fighting. Some of it is choosing to understand a world that is not your own." Solara felt a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps her father's command might not be entirely impossible. But doubts lingered. Could she truly trust a human to navigate their complex world? Could she balance curiosity with caution? Meanwhile, in the throne room, Kelvern watched from afar. The human was performing well, yet he knew the real test was not in intelligence or courage, it was in the hearts of his daughters. He needed to see who would follow tradition and who would dare to defy. That night, Lysera and Mirth met again in secret. "He is clever," Lysera admitted reluctantly. "I see why Father admires him, but cleverness is not enough. He does not know our world fully. He cannot understand all the dangers, the politics, the expectations." Mirth nodded. "And yet, there is something in him that makes me think differently. Perhaps this human is not just a stranger. Perhaps he is." Bridge Lysera shook her head. "Be careful. We cannot afford to be swayed too quickly. If we make a mistake, the consequences could be disastrous, not just for us, but for the Empire." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alarm. A council member burst into the room, breathless. "Your Majesty, there is a disturbance at the northern gates. A group of dissidents is trying to infiltrate the palace." Kelvern immediately activated the palace defenses. Guards rushed to their stations, energy shields flickering as ships hovered overhead. The princesses watched from their chambers, hearts pounding. This was the first real threat they had faced since the humans' arrival, and it tested them in ways they had not expected. Jaren, ever alert, moved quickly. "Thart, show me the way," he said to the guards. "We need to protect the palace and the people." Lysera's eyes widened. He was not a warrior, yet he took command calmly, analyzing the situation and directing the guards efficiently. Within minutes, the intruders were neutralized, not harmed, but captured and restrained with precision. The princesses were stunned. The human had proven himself capable in a crisis. He had shown bravery, intelligence, and leadership, all qualities they had doubted he possessed. That night, in the quiet of her chamber, Solara reflected on what she had seen. "Perhaps he is different from what I imagined," she thought. "Perhaps Father was right to trust him." Not all the princesses were convinced. Lysera and Lysera. A few others continued to question his abilities, planning ways to resist the marriage without dishonoring their father. They whispered in corridors, sent secret messages, and observed Jaren closely, looking for weaknesses they could use if necessary. The tension between obedience and rebellion grew stronger each day. Some princesses found themselves drawn to the human's courage and kindness. Others clung to tradition, fearful of the unknown. And the human, unaware of the quiet battles within the palace, continued to adapt, learn, and inspire both admiration and resistance. Kelvern, observing everything, knew the coming days would determine more than just marriages. They would determine the future of the Glatherian Empire. Could his daughters balance duty with heart? Could the human survive the complex web of politics, tradition, and rebellion? Only time would tell. As the moons rose high over the palace, the princesses met once more in secret. "We must decide soon," Mirth said quietly. "Our actions will shape not only our futures, but the Empire itself." Lysera nodded. "And we must be careful. One wrong move, and all could be lost." Solara, silent until now, finally spoke. "Perhaps it is not just about obedience or rebellion. Perhaps it is about courage, the courage to understand, to act, and to face what is unknown." The human, oblivious to their meeting, continued to walk the palace halls, learning, observing, and unknowingly testing the hearts of the princesses. He was no longer just a visitor, he had become a part of their world, challenging their assumptions and inspiring both admiration and defiance. And in the throne room, Kelvern smiled faintly. The test had begun, and the outcome would change everything. The palace was alive with tension. For weeks, the human ambassador, Jaren, had lived among the Glatherian princesses, learning their ways, observing their culture, and quietly winning the admiration of some while stirring the doubts of others. Yet no one had tested him like the challenge coming now. It began in the early morning when alarms rang through the palace halls. The distant hum of ships and the flashing warning lights told the royal family that an external threat had arrived. A coalition of political rivals from neighboring star systems had decided to exploit the unusual situation. A human living in the Glatherian palace. They hoped to capture him, embarrass the king, and force the princesses into decisions that would destabilize the empire. Kelvorn's eyes narrowed as he activated the palace defense system. Guards rushed to their stations, energy shields rose, and drones hovered in formation around the palace towers. He knew this was the moment to test both his daughters and the human. Jaren, ever calm, stepped into the command room alongside Kelvorn. "What's happening?" he asked in attack. Kelvorn replied, voice firm. "They aim to seize you and weaken the Empire." Jaren's jaw tightened. "Then we must act quickly. Tell me what I can do." The king observed him closely. The human was not a warrior in the traditional sense. He did not carry weapons like a Glatherian soldier. Yet his mind, sharp and creative, had already proven capable of solving problems that baffled the council. Kelvorn decided to allow him freedom, trusting in his courage. Outside, the attackers had already breached the outer defenses. Ships hovered near the palace's force field, and small infiltration teams were attempting to slip through hidden corridors. The princesses watched from balconies, hearts racing. This was no longer a test of obedience. This was a test of survival, courage, and trust. Jaren moved swiftly through the command room, analyzing schematics of the palace, the placement of intruders, and the best way to stop them without unnecessary harm. "If we can redirect the patrol drones to block the north and south corridors," he said, "we can isolate the intruders. Then the palace defense turrets can disable their ships without destroying them." Kelvorn nodded. "Do it." The plan worked. Within minutes, the intruders were contained. Jaren coordinated the drones, communicated with the guards, and even directed some of the princesses to assist in minor tasks, opening gates, redirecting corridors, and helping the palace inhabitants move to safe zones. Solara watched him in awe. She had admired him before, but now she saw a level of courage she had never imagined. He was human, yes, but he acted with the heart of a Glatherian warrior, intelligent, fearless, and calm under pressure. The attack escalated. Some intruders managed to slip through the northern corridor, reaching the gardens where several princesses were stationed. Lysera, Mirth, and Solara quickly took action, helping the guards guide civilians to safety. Yet they faced a choice: fight directly, risking harm, or rely on Jaren's plan. Lysera hesitated. Her instincts screamed to protect her sisters and the palace. She realized now that defying the humans' guidance could end in disaster. She turned to Mirth. "We follow him. Trust him." "For the Empire?" And Mirth nodded. "For the Empire," she echoed. Jaren led the final push. He directed drones, managed defensive turrets, and even confronted a small group of intruders himself, using clever traps and strategies instead of violence. Within an hour, the threat was neutralized. The intruders were captured, and the palace remained secure. The princesses were shaken, yet impressed. They had doubted him, resisted him quietly, and now they had witnessed his courage and brilliance firsthand. The human was not fragile, not weak, and certainly not a threat to their traditions. He was an ally, a bridge between two worlds. In the throne room, Kelvorn observed the aftermath. The princesses returned, their expressions a mix of relief, admiration, and newfound respect. "Well done," he said to Jaren. "You have proven yourself more than capable. You have saved this palace, and perhaps a future for the Empire." Jaren bowed, respectfully. "I only did what I could to protect your people." Lysera stepped forward, her eyes steady. "Father," she began, "we have seen his courage, his intelligence, and his respect for our ways. We were wrong to doubt him. Perhaps he is not just a human. Perhaps he is a symbol of what our empire can achieve by embracing the unknown." Mirth nodded in agreement. "We understand now. Courage, understanding, and respect are stronger than tradition alone. We wish to honor that." Kelvorn's stern expression softened. For decades, he had ruled with wisdom, but he had never seen his daughters grow so fast in understanding. Their words reflected the strength of heart and mind that he had always hoped to cultivate. He rose from his throne. "Then let this be a new beginning," he said. "You have shown that bravery and wisdom can come from unexpected places. You have learned that strength is not measured only by tradition, but by the courage to understand and act." The princesses bowed deeply. Jaren, too, bowed, feeling the weight of their acceptance and respect. He had not only survived the test, but had inspired trust and admiration. In the following days, the palace began preparations for a celebration not just of survival, but of unity. The princesses engaged with the human openly, learning from his perspectives and sharing their own. Walls of doubt slowly melted into walls of respect and curiosity. Solara found herself walking with Jaren in the palace gardens. "You faced the attack with bravery," she said softly. "You could have fled, but you did not." "Why?" Jaren looked at her, thoughtful. "Because running away solves nothing. Courage is not the absence of fear, is acting despite fear, and I could not stand by while others were in danger. I had to try." Solara smiled faintly. "You truly are different from what I imagined." He returned her smile. "Perhaps we all are, once someone takes the time to understand us." In the throne room, Kelvern addressed the Empire through the palace communication system. "Citizens of Glatheria, let this event be remembered. Strength is not measured only by power, but by courage, wisdom, and understanding. Today we have learned that the human mind, though different from ours, can achieve greatness. Let this be a new chapter in our history." The announcement spread across planets, inspiring discussions, admiration, and curiosity. Humans were no longer seen as fragile outsiders. They were respected for their ingenuity, courage, and moral strength. The princesses gathered privately to discuss the next steps. "Father's command was difficult," Lysera said, "but perhaps it was meant to teach us, not to force us. We have learned courage, trust, and the value of seeing beyond what we know." Mirth nodded. "We have grown not just as daughters of the king, but as leaders capable of guiding our empire into the future." Solara added, "And we have seen that humans are more than we imagined. Perhaps this is the beginning of something extraordinary." The human ambassador, now fully accepted by the royal family, continued his work. He studied Glatherian science, shared human strategies for diplomacy and problem-solving, and even engaged in light-hearted competitions with the princesses' games of logic speed, an ingenuity that brought laughter and camaraderie to the palace halls. Weeks passed, and the initial tension gave way to mutual respect and friendship. Some princesses grew closer to Jaren, finding common ground in courage and curiosity. Others maintained their careful distance, respecting tradition, while acknowledging the human's abilities. The palace, once divided by doubt, now reflected unity and understanding. Kelvern, observing the transformation, realized that his command had achieved more than he had hoped. The human had not only survived but had inspired growth in his daughters and demonstrated that strength could take many forms. By the end of the month, he called a council meeting not to command, but to listen. The princesses spoke freely, sharing their experiences, insights, and reflections on the human ambassador. They described his courage, his respect for their ways, and the wisdom he had brought to their empire. Kelvern listened, silently proud. Finally, he addressed the human. "Jaren of Earth, you have proven yourself worthy of respect, not by force, but by courage, understanding, and integrity. You have earned the trust of my daughters and the admiration of my people. You are now more than a visitor, you are a partner in the future of the Glatherian Empire." Jaren bowed deeply, humbled. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will do everything I can to honor this trust." The princesses gathered around him, smiling. For the first time, they saw not just a human, but an ally, a friend, and perhaps something more. In the weeks that followed, the palace celebrated both tradition and innovation. The human ambassador continued to learn, the princesses continued to grow, and the Glatherian Empire began a new Year One, where courage, intelligence, and understanding bridged worlds, and where the hearts of the young could shape the destiny of an entire civilization. Kelvern watched from his throne, quietly satisfied. He had tested his daughters, welcomed a human into his empire, and seen them all rise to the challenge. The future was uncertain. Yes, but now it was also bright, filled with possibilities that no one could have imagined before, and so the human and the princesses began a journey not just of marriage or duty, but of courage, unity, and the shared vision of a future stronger than either species could have achieved alone. The Empire had survived the test, and in doing so, it had learned that courage, understanding, and trust, we